Hey everyone, we're here again for session 5 of Overflow, our marriage study that we have going on. I'm so excited, and this is going to be just a great session for you. And you're just going to be digging in a little bit more with your spouse. And this topic, I think, is going to just really just rock you guys if you are just ready just to dig in some more. So I want to talk through today about how to overflow through conflict in your marriage. It's not a matter of if you're going to go through conflict in your marriage. The question is when we're going to go through conflict in our marriage. And so I want you to think about with me about how we can just move forward, especially in conflict, because there's going to be some times it's going to come up and you're going to just wonder, can I really make through this? Can I really go through this? Yes, you can. And we're going to just show you what that can look like. Now, I want you to think about this past year. This has been the last few years, it's been kind of rough on marriages. There's been a lot of financial stress. There's been a lot of work stress. People have been around home like never before. There's been a lot of just things have just piled on. I remember whenever I played junior high football that there was a time whenever I was a quarterback. I know you can just look at me and just screams quarterback, but the reality is that sometimes you get tackled and you'd be on the bottom of the pile and there'd be these guys that would come and they want to just jump on top of the pile. Well, that could be easily sometimes the way that our marriage feels, that it feels like everything's just piling on. And in those moments, we can be very sensitive to conflict. And so how do we deal with that? How do we deal with conflict in our marriage? That's what I want us to talk about. Listen to what it says in Proverbs 18, verse 2. It says, "Fools find no pleasure in understanding, but delight in airing their own opinions." What does that mean for me? I need to have a posture for listening, not merely responding. I think that's one of the first steps that sometimes we get in trouble with, is that we want to just respond in conflict instead of listen through conflict. The reality is that you're going to have different opinions. You're going to have different ways in which you think a conflict is to be resolved. As we talked about earlier, how you have different personalities, you bring those into conflict. And so you're going to have some times in which you're going to say, no, I think that it ought to be solved this way. And the other person say, well, no, I think it ought to be solved this way. And in fact, here's the thing. We listen sometimes to what we want to hear. You know, if I'm hearing that I'm doing the right thing, that's what I'll celebrate sometimes in conflict, where my spouse is really trying to say something totally different to me. And also we can sometimes see constructive criticism as nagging. So maybe our spouse is really trying to tell us something that's constructive, but yet we sometimes want to hear it, well, man, that's nagging. All you're doing is just telling me that over and over again. That's just straight up nagging, and we turn it off in a lot of ways. And then here's the thing we can also do. We like to take our opinions and we like to manipulate them into facts. I think in our culture today, we have an overuse of the word literally. We literally overuse the word literally, if that could work. You know, the reality is that sometimes what we do is we want to take those words and we want to say, this is what you're literally doing to me. And whenever sometimes it can be just our opinion of how things are going. And then we have to understand that we've got to learn how to know and adjust through our differences. Once again, if we're going to have different personalities, different opinions, we've got to bring those things into our marriage, yes, and into conflict we will. But we have to understand as well, there's adjustments that need to be made. We have to know how to adjust through those things. So here's the other thing about conflict that we have to do. We have to check yourself before you wreck yourself. I came from an old rap song back in the 90s. But listen to what it says in Philippians chapter 2, verses 3 and 4. Do nothing from selfishness or empty conceit. Nothing. But with humility of mind, regard one another as more important than yourselves. Do not merely look out for your own personal interests, but look out for the interests of others. If I'm going to have a way in which I'm going to approach conflict, I need to check myself before I wreck myself, which means at first I defeat selfishness. If I'm coming into a conflict, it's not about my way and the only way, right? I need to be looking out for the interests of my spouse. But even through that conflict, we need to pursue each other. How are we pursuing each other? Pursuing a resolution to this. And then how am I lovingly confronting one another? And even I'll say on the lovingly confronting one another, sometimes it's just as important of the when you're going to say something as it is the what you're going to say. You see, if we're from a big metropolitan city and we're driving home through some crazy traffic. Maybe you've had to sit in, bumper to bumper for an hour. You're stressed to the max level, and you come in that moment, and then you're automatically having a conflict conversation. I'm not going to be ready to listen to that. And the other thing as well is that I don't need to do this before I go to bed, because all that's doing is just adding stress. In fact, that's even scriptural. Don't go to bed on your anger. And so what we have to understand is sometimes there's value to when that we're saying something just as much as what we're saying, so that it'll help in that. And it might be that you sit down after a meal, you sit down at a very important time that you're just removed away from distractions. All that's going to do is just help you out in that. And here's the last thing I say in conflict. Give space for grace. You kind of go back to our expectations gap, the conflict that we experienced there. What do we say the bridge is going to be between communication and grace? And so even through conflict, you may be going through something, and the other spouse, they need some space for grace in order to make some things better. It may not be something that's going to happen automatically, but you need some time, or they need some time for some space for grace to work through that. Listen to what it says in Colossians 1, 9 through 14. It says, "For this reason, since the day we heard about you, we've not stopped praying for you. We continually ask God to fill you with all the knowledge of his will." So what am I doing in a time of giving space for grace? I am praying for my spouse. I'm praying for God to just show them their God's will. I'm praying for that to just occur more and more. And then listen to what it goes on to say, "Bearing fruit in every work, growing in the knowledge of God." You see, if I'm giving space for grace and I'm praying for my spouse, then I want to give an opportunity as well for them to bear fruit. I want to give them opportunity that they are showing that they're growing in the knowledge of God's will. That's progress that's occurring. And that's what happens when we give space for grace. There could be those radical changes, those radical moments, all those things, yes. But we also see for real change to occur, real resolution of conflict to occur, we've got to give that space for grace. So resolving conflict always begins in prayer. We have to remember that. Some changes are a journey, but they should always be progressing. And grace should always lead to fruitfulness. That should be our response to grace. Whenever I'm giving grace to my wife, her response ought to be fruitfulness in that. And the way that we're going to live a life worthy of the Lord is through his grace alone. I didn't earn it. And so I need to make sure that I am as well. I'm showing an unmerited grace to my spouse in that. And we remember that grace strengthens and sustains us. Guys, that is the key on resolving conflict. It is that we understand there's this posture of listening that I have. We understand that I'm checking my motives. I'm checking my selfishness. I'm checking my heart as I'm coming into conflict. But also as well, I'm ready to extend and give space for grace. Guys, this is great stuff that we're just talking through. And I'm looking forward as we're just continuing on with our next study and next session. So I look forward to seeing you at the next time that we gather together. God bless.